You will hear about the African Union. Yes, it exists, but what is the effect of the African Union in reality? Music. We cannot talk about integration in the theme, and not talk about the African Union, because it is this organization that should unite us, create real integration. But we regret to see these wars that persist on the African continent, killing millions of young people, and that this organization, which has heads of state with armies, is unable to organize itself to support certain countries' music. The Union is not just a word, the Union is a symbol in a move that has sent shockwaves. Across West Africa, ECOWAS has once again boldly summoned Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to its upcoming summit, a clear signal that it refuses to acknowledge the new alliance formed by these nations. Simultaneously, an African Union delegation has descended on Burkina Faso for direct talks with Captain Ibrahim Traoré. These abrupt maneuvers raise a pressing question: what's driving this sudden urgency? Let's find out. On June 17th, Traoré received Antonio Tite, the special envoy of the O chairperson, at the Kiluba Palace in Ouagadougou. This visit, cloaked in diplomatic pleasantries, marks a stunning reversal from the O's long-standing condemnation of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger for their courageous exit from ECOWAS and their formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AS. Meanwhile, Nigeria's unexpected invitation to the AS nations to attend the West Africa Economic Summit at the Abuja International Conference Center reveals a desperate attempt to claw back influence over a region that has decisively rejected Western manipulation. These events are not mere diplomatic overtures. They expose the crumbling facade of Western-controlled regional bodies and the unstoppable rise of a new African order. Led by uncompromising leaders like Traoré, the AS in less than 2 years has achieved what the O and EAS have failed to do in decades, fostering genuine African solidarity, economic independence, and a vision for a united continent free from imperialist shackles. Before I dive deeper into this list, me go back to the arrival of Antonio Tite in Ouagadougou on June 17th, which was framed as an exercise in the O's so-called principle of non-indifference, a doctrine that supposedly compels the organization to engage with crises across the continent. Tite claimed his mission was to listen to the authorities of Burkina Faso and assess the challenges facing the Sahel, particularly its dire security situation. He spoke of solidifying bridges and fostering African solidarity and common destiny. After discussions with Traoré about Burkina Faso's national situation, yet this visit reeks of hypocrisy. For years the O has vilified Traoré and his counterparts in Mali and Niger, imposing sanctions and issuing condemnations for their military-led governments which seized power to address the failures of corrupt civilian regimes. The O's sudden interest in dialogue comes not from a genuine desire for African unity, but from a fear of irrelevance as the AES forges a path that exposes the organization's impotence. The O, established in 2002 as a successor to the Organization of African Unity, OO, was meant to be a beacon of continental unity, economic progress, and self-determination, yet it has become a hollow shell, a stage for African leaders to deliver eloquent speeches that mask their subservience to Western interests. For decades, the O has failed to deliver on its promises of integration, security, and development. It has not established a viable African stand by force to address conflicts like the Sahel's jihadist insurgencies. It has not advanced the African continental free trade area, AfCAV, beyond bureaucratic rhetoric. It has not challenged the exploitation of African minerals by Western corporations. Instead, it has served as a platform for corrupt leaders to showcase their oratorial fluency while their citizens languish in poverty. The O's budget, heavily reliant on foreign donors like the European Union and the United States, underscores its lack of autonomy. Over 70% of its funding comes from external sources, rendering it a puppet of Western powers who dictate its priorities. The visit to Ouagadougou is not about solidarity. It is a desperate attempt to rein in a movement that threatens the O's cozy relationship with its Western masters. Nigeria's invitation to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to attend the 2025 West Africa Economic Summit. It is equally telling. Ambassador Asif Tuga, Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, justified the move by stating that exiting ECOWAS does not erase the three nations' West African identity. This gesture, however, is not an olive branch, but a thinly veiled attempt to undermine the EAS's growing influence. ECOWAS, like the O, has long been a tool of Western manipulation, imposing crippling sanctions on the AES nations after their coups in 2020, Mali, 2022, Burkina Faso, and 2023, Niger. These sanctions, which included border closures, no-fly zones, and asset freezes, were designed to strangle the economies of these landlocked nations and force them back into the fold of neo-colonial control. Yet the AES nations stood firm, rejecting ECOWAS's threats and forming their own confederation to pursue true sovereignty. The sanctions backfired spectacularly in Niger. Food and medicine shortages fueled anti-eco sentiment, with citizens rallying behind their UNITA leaders. In Burkina Faso, Traore's defiance resonated across the continent, earning him hero status among African youth. Mali's Colonel Ami Goïta and Niger's General Abdurrahmane Chiani echoed Traore's call for self-reliance, forming the AES as a direct rebuke to ECOWAS's Western-backed agenda. Now Nigeria's invitation to the summit betrays a reluctant admission that the AES is succeeding where ECOWAS has failed by extending this invitation. Nigeria hopes to lure the AES nations back into a weakened ECOWAS, preserving the bloc's relevance and appeasing its Western sponsors who are alarmed by the Sahel's pivot to Russia, Turkey, and other non-Western partners. The hypocrisy is stark. ECOWAS, founded in 1975 to promote economic integration and collective self-sufficiency, has been complicit in perpetuating Africa's economic dependence. Its leaders, particularly Nigeria's, have often acted as proxies for Western interests, enforcing sanctions that harm African citizens while protecting foreign corporations that plunder the continent's resources. The EAS's eggs. It exposed ECOWAS's double standards, as it has failed to sanction civilian leaders who manipulate constitutions to extend their rule, such as Togo's Foyn. The invitation to the summit. It is not about unity, but about salvaging a bloc that has lost legitimacy in the eyes of many Africans in less than 2 years. The Alliance of Sahel States has achieved what the O and ECOWAS have failed to accomplish in decades: tangible steps toward African sovereignty and unity. Formed on September 16, 2023, as a mutual defense pact in response to ECOWAS's threats against Niger, the AES was formalized as a confederation on July 6, 2024, in Niamey. Led by Traoré, Goïta, and Chiani, the AES has moved swiftly to create institutions that prioritize African agency over Western dictation. These achievements are a slap in the face to the O and ECOWAS, exposing their inertia and complicity in Africa's subjugation. 1. A unified military force. The AES has established a 5-0-0 strong joint military unit to combat jihadist insurgencies and external aggression. Unlike ECOWAS's ineffective stand by force or the O's non-existent African stand by force, the AES force is already operational, coordinating across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to secure their borders. This force has leveraged Russian and Turkish military support, replacing French troops that were expelled for their failure to curb terrorism. While the security situation remains challenging, the EAS's proactive approach contrasts sharply with ECOWAS's reliance on Western-owned initiatives like the JAI Sahel, which collapsed due to underfunding and French dominance. To a common visa. On January 29, 2025, the AES introduced a unified visa system allowing seamless travel across its member states. This move mirrors ECOWAS's visa-free protocol, but goes further by prioritizing the free movement of AES citizens without Western oversight. The visa system facilitates economic integration and cultural exchange, fostering a sense of shared identity among Burkinabe's Malians and Nigerians. It stands in stark contrast to the O's stalled efforts to implement a continent-wide passport, which remains a pipe dream after years of bureaucratic delays. 3. A unified flag. On February 22, 2021, the AES unveiled its official flag, a symbol of its commitment to a shared destiny. The flag represents the Confederation's rejection of neo-colonial divisions and its aspiration to build a federation that could become Africa's largest military-ruled state. This symbolic act resonates deeply with African youth who see the AES as a bold step toward the Pan-African ideals championed by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. 4. A common currency in the works, perhaps the most revolutionary move, is the ECOWAS plan to introduce a new currency, tentatively called the Sahel, to replace the CFA franc, a relic of French colonialism that ties 8 West African economies wise to France's monetary system. Traoré has called the CFA franc a mechanism that maintains Africa in slavery, and the ECOWAS push for a new currency aims to break this economic stranglehold. The Confederation has established the Confederate Bank for Investment and Development (BIDAS) to finance infrastructure, agriculture, and energy projects, reducing reliance on Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank. This move threatens the economic dominance of France and other Western powers who benefit from the CFA franc's fixed exchange rate and repatriation of African reserves to Paris. These achievements highlight the ECOWAS commitment to practical people-centered integration, unlike the O's grandiose Agenda 2063 or ECOWAS's toothless trade protocols. The AES, in delivering results that resonate with ordinary Africans, its focus on security, mobility, and economic independence addresses the immediate needs of the Sahel's 76 million people who have suffered from decades of neglect by corrupt civilian governments and Western-backed regional bodies. Captain Ibrahim Traore has been unrelenting in his criticism of ECOWAS, exposing its role as a pawn of Western interests in a historic speech at the first AES summit on July 6, 2024. In Nami trial, Ray declared, "This continent has suffered and continues to suffer from the fire of the imperialists. Westerners consider that we belong to them, and our wealth also belongs to them. They think that they are the ones who must continue to tell us what is good for our states. This era is gone. Forever, our resources will remain for us, and our populations." This powerful oration, echoed by Goita and Chiani, articulated the ECOWAS mission to reclaim African sovereignty and reject the neo-colonial framework that ECOWAS perpetuates. Traoré's rhetoric draws heavily from the legacy of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, who was assassinated in 1987. For his anti-imperialist stance, like Sankara, Traoré has accused ECOWAS of serving Western masters who exploit Africa's resources while offering crumbs in the form of aid. He has pointed to ECOWAS's sanctions as evidence of its betrayal, noting that they targeted the poorest nations in the bloc, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, while sparing wealthier coastal states. With equally undemocratic leaders, in a January 2024 interview with French broadcaster, Traoré reiterated that his priority was security and sovereignty, not elections dictated by foreign powers. His outspokenness has made him a hero among African youth, who see him as a fearless leader, challenging a system that has kept Africa subservient for centuries. The O and IAS have long been compromised by their dependence on Western funding and influence. The O's reliance on external donors for over 70% of its budget ensures that its policies align with Western interests, from trade agreements that favor multinational corporations to security initiatives that prioritize Western geopolitical goals. The O's failure to address the Sahel's jihadist crisis, which accounts for nearly half of global terrorism deaths, is a glaring example of its ineffectiveness. Its African peace security architecture, APAC, remains a paper tiger with no operational capacity to intervene in conflicts like those in Mali or Burkina Faso. ECOWAS, similarly, has been co-opted by Western powers, particularly France and the United States. Its sanctions on the AES nations were orchestrated under pressure from Paris and Washington, who feared losing control over the Sahel's vast mineral wealth, including Niger's uranium, Mali's gold, and Burkina Faso's manganese. These sanctions were not about restoring democracy, but about punishing governments that dared to expel French troops and align with Russia. ECOWAS's selective outrage, condemning military coups while ignoring civilian leaders who cling to power through constitutional manipulation, has eroded its legitimacy. Leaders like Togo's Nassing, who changed his constitution to extend his family's 57-year rule face no repercussions, while AES nations are vilified for prioritizing their people's needs. The O and ECOWAS have also failed to address Africa's systemic exploitation. The continent holds 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including 60% of cobalt, 90% of platinum, and significant deposits of gold, uranium, and lithium, yet African nations see little benefit from these resources. Western corporations like France's Orano and Canada's Barrick Gold extract billions in profits, while leaving local communities impoverished. The CFA franc, used by 14 African countries, ensures that monetary policy remains under French control. With reserves held in Paris and trade terms favoring European markets, the O's silence on this economic colonialism is deafening, as is ECOWAS's complicity in enforcing trade agreements that prioritize Western interests over African development. Africa is a continent of unparalleled potential with a population of 1.4 billion, vast arable land, and abundant natural resources. It could be a global powerhouse, yet puppet leaders have reduced Africa to a beggar on the international stage. For decades, African heads of state have flocked to O's summits to deliver flowery speeches about unity and progress, only to return home and perpetuate corruption, mismanagement, and dependence on foreign aid. The O's Agenda 2063, billed as a blueprint for a prosperous Africa, is a mirage with no tangible progress on key goals like a single currency, a continental free trade area, or a unified security framework. AFCA, launched in 2018, has been hampered by bureaucratic inertia and protectionist policies from member states, leaving intra-African trade at a paltry 15% of total trade, compared to 60% in Asia and 70% in Europe. African leaders' addiction to international begging has entrenched a cycle of dependency. Countries like Nigeria, despite being Africa's largest economy, rely on loans from the IMF and World Bank, which come with conditions that prioritize debt repayment over social services. In 2023, Nigeria spent 96% of its revenue on debt servicing, leaving little for education or health care. Meanwhile, Western nations and corporations extract Africa's wealth with impunity. The Democratic Republic of Congo, home to 70% of the world's cobalt, sees less than 5% of the profits from its mining industry, with companies like Glencore and China molybdenum reaping the rewards. This exploitation is enabled by corrupt leaders who sign lopsided contracts in exchange for personal gain, leaving their citizens to bear the cost of environmental degradation and poverty. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is rewriting the script. Since seizing power in September 2022, he has launched a radical agenda to harness the country's mineral wealth for its people. Burkina Faso is Africa's fourth largest gold producer, yet decades of foreign domination left it one of the world's poorest nations, with 24.9% of its population living on less than 2015. Today, Traoré's government has taken decisive steps to reverse this trend. State-owned mining company Traoré established a state-owned mining company that requires foreign firms to cede a 15% stake in their operations and transfer skills to Burkina workers. This policy applies even to Russian miner Nord, which received a license in April 2012, but must comply with local empowerment rules. Gold refinery and reserves. For the first time in its history, Burkina Faso is building a gold refinery and establishing national gold reserves. This move ensures that the country retains more value from its mineral exports, reducing reliance on foreign refineries and creating jobs. Burkina's economic reforms. The IMF and World Bank, despite their Western bias, have acknowledged Burkina Faso's economic progress under Traoré. The IMF noted commendable progress in raising domestic revenue and increasing spending on education, health, and social protection, projecting robust growth. 200. The World Bank reported a drop in extreme poverty from 26.8% in 20 to 24.9% in 2024, driven by growth in agriculture and services. Military investments. Traoré has doubled military spending and created a rapid support force to combat jihadist insurgencies using revenues from mining and taxes. Drones and helicopters acquired through partnerships with Russia and Turkey have bolstered Burkina Faso's counterterrorism efforts. These reforms have transformed Burkina Faso from a neo-colonial outpost to a symbol of African self-reliance. Traoré's refusal to accept a presidential salary, opting instead for his modest army income, has endeared him to ordinary Burkinabés who see him as a leader committed to their welfare. His youth at 37, he is the world's second youngest head of state, and his fiery anti-imperialist rhetoric evoke comparisons to Sankara, whose legacy inspires a new generation of Africans.